You've found your way to Blood Moon Radio. I'm Coraley, and this is where we follow the threads the world wants us to drop. In this continuation of Embodying Empress with Alexandra Beller, we discuss creative process, the limits of language, and the purpose of story and meaning making. What we find is that curiosity about ourselves, others, and the world around us creates the through line for connection, clearer perspective, and nurturing community. Part 1 left off here. That's what I feel when I am in the woods.
Yeah. And I feel like that about movement. Those are religious experiences for me.
Step inside Embodying Empress, Part 2. Yeah. You're making me think back to choreographing, and that's how I would talk when I choreographed. And I think at teaching, dancing, observing other teachers, not everyone taps in that way either, right? I can remember being in classes, usually the teachers where choreography, they're very good technical teachers, but they, arguably should just have someone else come in and choreograph for them because it's not their thing. It's a chore for them. It's mechanical. Their dances don't hit on anything, really. I can remember feeling that. It feels
derivative.
It doesn't have the magic. Yeah,
and then
it doesn't have the magic that some people
too. Like you can have these amazing choreographers, and I'm like, don't teach though. Just because you're an amazing dancer, amazing creator, doesn't mean teaching is its own art, and it doesn't mean don't try teaching, but it does mean there's a real responsibility to learning the art of teaching that is totally separate from any other part of your art. And I do see quite a few people who are absolutely phenomenal dancers, performers. And then they go in and they're not really they're just kind of dancing in class, and it inspires other dancers because they want to be like you. Yeah. But you don't actually have the facility to help them get there.
Teaching is such an important, I think it's something undervalued in our society. I won't go off on this tangent too far, but having children in school and watching, you can tell the teachers that that's their calling. That's what they're there to do. They have a real gift. And that's, I think, the people that should be teaching are the people that are either, and you can get there through work, or it could be a natural calling. But if you're there because this is okay to do, or that was an easy degree, or you're good at something and you think you're going to be good at teaching it, but you hate teaching, and it comes through, it's not the space for you. It is a responsibility.
Yeah. I also think there are teachers that go in because they want to feel like they have answers. And I feel like teaching is actually mostly about generating questions.
You've expressed that creation should be an act of survival. Is creativity something you experience as an internal process, or is it something you're in conversation with, something more reciprocal?
They're not mutually exclusive for me. I do think that our innate architecture for survival is creativity, right? So the way our neurology works, synapse shoots out a little chemical and is trying to find another synapse to receive it, and that forms a neural connection, neural pathway. If the baby's trying to learn how to grab a toy, it tries and fails and tries something else and fails. Each of those tries and quote unquote failures is an attempt that didn't work, shoot it somewhere else, an attempt that didn't work, shoot it somewhere else. Oh, that connected in a way that actually created a motor pathway, right? And so the way that we develop and learn and progress is creation, including how we learn to survive, whether that's emotionally, socially, physically, intellectually, which is why I've been doing a lot of work around disability pedagogy, or pedagogy for disabled artists. And we've been talking about what are the gifts and strengths and what is the valor in the disabled body that people who can identify as able-bodied don't have. And that the world is clearly not made for access for many bodies and minds, disabilities, not only physical, right? And I can say this as somebody with a neurodivergent brain. the world and systems and websites and forums and what, not made for me.
Yeah.
And there's something in Laban, a theme we call stability mobility, and it's about how we need for mobility, but stability is mobility. Like the stability of adaptation, or bridges are made to sway, or if you stand and close your eyes, you'll be moving a little bit. That is your stability. Rigidity and brittleness is not stability, it's stasis. So I feel like the world is hyperstable in a lot of ways, and people who have less access to that world are the ones who have to move and navigate and shift and reform themselves. That is creativity. That adaptability is them creating. And so it is both an internal and external conversation, creativity. For me, in terms of actual dance and art, choreography and theater, I do believe that it doesn't exist up here in my mind. It only exists once I have formed something out in the world, whether that's I've put words on a page, or I've put words into a device, or I've made movement visible in my body. Me imagining what something might look like if we did it, to me, is not creativity, it's theory. So I'm a big fan of creating fast, quickly, and just making things, not editing them, not critiquing them, not analyzing them, making quickly, and then going into that more analytical, intellectual, logical, critical brain, and letting all of those parts of you be like, it's boring, or there's too much repetition, or I like it, but I don't know why it's there. And, being kind of a hard ass. But I think they need to be separate, so that instinct, intuition, sensation, feeling are separate from thinking and logicking and analyzing and critiquing, and they don't play well together. So I think that creativity is a lemniscate, like a Mobius band between those two things, instinct and all of this like feeling, authenticity, embodiment, and this great analytical rigor. And we need both of them, but not at the same moment.
Have you ever had moments in your work that felt unexplainable or beyond language?
Most of my work feels unexplainable, and I think I've chosen dance because it is a language, but it's beyond verbal and written language. I was choreographing this play, which was an adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, the Jane Austen novel, and I was choreographing the opening dance, which happens before the first line of text, and we'd been working on it for probably half a day, and then one of the actors said, "So this all happens before any language comes in?" And I just like very dramatically turned to him and I said, "This is language." And one of the other actors like hit him on the head with a script and was like, "Doofus." And everybody was like, "Oh, yeah, it is language." So I think this is language to me, and I think I use it because so many things are inarticulatable but palpable. And there's so much that I cannot parse apart in written or verbal language, but I can express. And there's so much that I don't know, but my body knows. And my body often shares things with me and gives me information that I did not know before. And then is where I think some of the danger comes in, at least for me, is starting to articulate that stuff into verbal and written language starts to make it a story. And some of those stories can be really useful. Some of those stories are pragmatic and can be really useful. I am in menopause and I'm having trouble sleeping, and I think these are some of the factors, and I'm going to go try to adjust things so that I can affect those factors and give myself more breath and space and sleep. So that's a useful story. ADHD was a useful story for me. It's not useful for everybody else, right? Like some people are like, "I don't want a label. I don't want you to say that I'm bipolar or have clinical depression, because that doesn't help me. It locks me into a story. And for somebody else, that allows them, opens up access to medication or treatment or accommodation that helps them live better. So everybody's going to have their own relationship with the feeling and how it becomes story. And I think it is a really dicey part of the artistic process, because when we try to lock things in and land them at story too quickly, we often exile some really useful information that we can't quite name or articulate. And if we're of the mindset where it's like, well, if I don't know what it is, I can't really say it, can't name it, it doesn't belong here. I like to let it sit there for quite a while and not know what it is. And the older I've gotten as an artist, the more tolerance I have for being able to sit there and be like, I don't know. Something about that is interesting. I don't know what it is yet. And keep playing with it rather than like, I don't know what that is. Let's get rid of it. One of my favorite art theorists, director Anne Bogart, wrote a book that is really an art Bible for me called A Director Prepares. And I can't quote it verbatim, but she talks at one point about how the more secure you are as an artist, making a piece of art, especially devising, is like walking into a forest without a path. And that the more secure you become as an artist, the longer you're willing to walk into the forest before you feel like, okay, I got to turn around and be able to find my way back home, because otherwise I'm just going to literally get lost and not survive in this forest. And when you're a younger artist or greener, you'll go in just a little ways and be like, okay, yeah, I have to go back because I need to know where I am. And the longer you've been in the field and have more comfort with yourself, the longer you're willing to be like, I will find my way back. I'll find my way out. It'll happen. I'm going to keep seeing where this takes me.
When you're talking about dance being a language of its own, and that can't always, it's exploring things that can't always be articulated by language. And you also brought up different people's perceptions or reactions to labels, language, the story. I'm wondering how it is to create work that's then released. And as we know, art, you said, art's not creativity till it's out there. But part of that is that when art happens, whether it's a painting, whether it's a book, a piece of writing, a story, whether it's dance, there's the interaction of others viewing it and them bringing their perceptions. And so having your own company where you're producing work, or even when you're choreographing these works for other people, you'll have written critiques happening where not only is your work being interpreted into language, possibly saying that it represents things that maybe aren't what you intended from someone else's point of view.
Yeah.
How is that in the process for you? Does it shift how you look at your own work? Do you remain steady in your original intention, or is it something much like universal creation that's always expanding out, where it just is what it is and it becomes its own piece of this creative process that's outside of you?
That would be idyllic. I can't say that I've arrived at that. I think it's similar to what happens in like a romantic breakup, where there is this possibility you can take this person's decisions and feelings about you and take that as some kind of fact about you, or you can see it as the ecosystem it is, which is like, okay, that person has certain feelings about me that I don't agree with. I could reject them wholesale. I could try to separate the way it got communicated with like a little bit of interrogation of myself of where is that true, or what do I think they drew that from? Why do I think they made that conclusion? And is there any usefulness for me in feeling into it and considering it and investigating it? And in my like highest self, I would say my ideal world would be to treat things like negative press in that way, in a like, interesting, that's a very different story that you have about my material than I have. I wonder where you got that from. Let me look at the work again and see if I can see it through those eyes and see what you're pulling and maybe what your filter is and how that created this gap between our perceptions. Have I ever done that when I've gotten like trashed in the Times? No, I absolutely cry in my bed and feel really hurt and embarrassed, humiliated. Which is also how I've often felt in love breakups. Like, you don't want me, I must be terrible, right? And then the work is to be like, hold on, like, let's slow down, let's separate this a little bit. When we do some of that work, but not quite enough of it, I think it looks like rejecting that person, dismissing their ideas. When we're at a higher level, we can have a conversation with those ideas without adopting them or rejecting them and being in a little bit of that nuanced, I used the word lemnis gate before, which is like a Mobius band or a two-dimensional infinity sign where the inner and the outer have this intersectional, interdependent relationship. I would like to have that relationship with critique. I don't always. And certainly it was a big factor in me switching over to theater. Not that I don't get critique in theater, but for one, unless I'm the director, the brunt of like, this show was the worst thing I've ever seen and nobody should go see it. The brunt of it's not on me anymore. Yeah. Unless they're like, this was unequivocally amazing, except for the movement, which was awful. And it's just not what happens, right? Partly because critics don't know how to look at movement. And that's usually been a negative thing for me, where they're like, the show is amazing. It's got so much flow. It's got so much energy. I'm like, do you know why? Oh, okay. No, you're not going to talk about the movement or the bodies or the stage. Not at all. Okay, great. That a lot of what you're talking about is from the choreography, but it's not visible to you. So most of that disconnect has been a disappointment, but also it does protect me, so I do feel like being so fatigued at grant rejections and commission rejections and the fact that one person can see your show on one night and then write something that lives forever and your show is gone. Nobody can see it again, maybe on video, but that's not your show. That's something else. So they saw it one time, one night. Maybe it was a bad show. Maybe it was a great show. They're one person. Maybe they had a terrible day. Maybe they love work like yours. Maybe they hate work like yours. And that person can write something that also can get edited without their say. Yep. And that goes into print and that lives forever. And your work is just in memory and they had the final say. It was very painful.
Yeah. I am struck as you're talking though about because I love big concepts. And so I love the idea of impermanence. I've gotten more comfortable with as I get older. And when you're talking about your show existing in that moment, however it was, I also love the idea of time not being linear. And so somewhere out there right now, your show is happening and it's in existence. And the version of your show that was in you or how you saw it or how everyone participating, that energy that no one else knows what it feels like in the backstage scenario when you're on the stage, right, is still there. I think that's more valuable, but you're right. It is a unfair byproduct of our world that someone can write whatever and then it's there, especially with the internet now.
Yeah, but it actually brings up something just in this conversation I'm recognizing is quite positive. I've been feeling, so I have a book about to be released in September, and I've been feeling a lot of trepidation because it's the first thing I've made that is this tangible thing that will just exist theoretically in perpetuity, right? And with a dance, it's like, oh, it's existing in your mind and it changes over time, or people like loved it, but they don't remember it. They might not love it anymore if they saw it, but because it's a memory, they're just like, oh, I loved that work, right? Yeah. And it doesn't have to hold up in a way. But a book, it has to hold up because you'll read it today and then maybe you'll read it in 5 years and be like, oh, what was she talking about? So I've had a lot of fear around this idea of a more tangible output. But as you were just talking about this, I thought, oh, that is the silver lining of it, which is like, I make this dance and in some way that dance no longer exists, but this review exists. And nobody can go back and be like, well, what's my opinion about it?
Yeah.
And I often would read a bad review and say, ooh, I want to go see that show actually. Like that kind of sounds awesome. I
Yeah.
think I'm going to disagree with you. And sometimes a bad review would bring me to a show. But of course, like temporally, that's hard because dance shows often exist for a weekend. So you read the review, sometimes the review doesn't even come out till after the show closes. So suddenly it occurs to me that like, oh, there's something for people to check their own opinion about because the thing that somebody's giving a review about will exist and they can go to it or they can go look up the quote themselves. And so there's something actually heartening about the idea of this tangibility that's just coming up for me in this conversation. So thank you for that.
What was it like? Because the book has got a template to help people explore their creativity, and your modality has traditionally been movement. And you just talked about the language of movement being so vastly different than written or spoken language.
Yeah.
Making that shift into creating something, talking about creating, like there's very layered, very meta dynamic here, right? With
Yeah.
talking about the creativity that traditionally you've expressed through the body and not through words. Can you talk a little bit about the shift?
Well, I do feel like I had quite a long learning journey about shifting it into spoken language because I've been mentoring artists and teaching for a long, long time now. And so that shift has been gratifying. And I've also put a lot of work into it, figuring out how to talk about things that feel unspeakable, and felt, and how to create metaphors and analogies and imageries for people and use language to really get at some of that material. So I do feel like I've been on a many decades long process of learning that translation. Putting them into writing, though, and not being in real time with people was a totally separate challenge that surprised me. And if somebody shows me a work of art in real time, or on video, but I'm watching the thing and I'm responding to this particular thing that's in front of me, I always have something to say. And I generally feel like I can find a way to communicate in such a way that the artist or person can receive value from it. And then I was just sitting here with my laptop thinking about every single possible artist, all the different things that they care about, what their different values and priorities and aesthetics are, what their different personalities and needs and learning styles are. And then I'm supposed to try to help them all. And I don't have any piece of art that I'm responding to. I'm just talking about in general, this happened. In general, this happened. No, in general? No, specifically what happened, but there's nothing in front of me. And so it became a real eddy for me. I was spiraling and spiraling for really, in some ways, years to figure out how to be specific, but not exclude people, but not caveat everything. And I mean, if you read the book, let me know how I did. That I think was the hardest part for me, that I felt like I didn't want to exclude anyone. I wanted everyone to feel seen, but then I kept making it bigger and bigger and more general. And one of the first pieces of feedback I ever got was from a dramaturg who was, I think, the first person to read any bit of this. And she was like, you're not saying anything. You're not putting yourself on the line. You're not giving an opinion. You're not stating a value. You're leaving it so open because you don't want to leave anybody out that you're not really saying anything. So you've got to take a stand. And that became a real scaffold for me to be like, you know what? It will exclude people, because anytime you express a priority or a value or really say what you care about, somebody's not going to share that with you. To go back to like the very beginning of our conversation, we don't share everything with each other. We have a lot of differences. So I think writing a book that people will either really agree or disagree with became the goal rather than writing the book that everybody would see themselves in. Because that book is boring. Because the biggest container that holds absolutely every artist is too simple, it's too generic. Because somebody really cares about just geometry and the math and the grid and something that they would call perfection and virtuosity, and somebody else just cares about flow and feeling and energy and connection and relationship. And so what am I talking about as guidance for both of those artists? I can't. I can talk about how you create better math and geometry and scaffold, or how you figure out that that's what you care about and then commit to it, or how you figure out that what you care about is energy and flow, et cetera, and how to invest in it. And it's not that I have to leave one whole group of those artists out of the book, but what I have to talk about is pulled back from those aesthetics themselves and be like, how do you figure out what you care about? And then how do you develop practices and rituals to get better at that? And that's really what the book is trying to do.
It's like a dance or a piece of art. The book is the same, right? It's not going to, you can't be for everyone. You as a person can't be for everyone either, right? It is
Yeah.
such a hard thing as humans, though, to not be, especially if you have a brain that, goes all over or sees things in a very vast way. To narrow down is challenging. It's always my challenge if I'm writing like an academic paper or something. I'm like, I got to bring it in to whatever I'm talking about. I want to go all these places, and that's just not the thing that you can do.
And then like as an empath, I'm, really feel nauseated at the idea of hurting somebody, so I'm like, well, if I say this, that this doesn't have rigor or is less valuable or doesn't meet the mark, and somebody's like, but that's me, that's what I do, and they're going to be hurt. Oh, I hate that idea that I've hurt somebody. So I am trying to like temper it with a lot of invitation to sovereignty as you read the book. I'm not trying to say, well, this is what it is, and so I'm telling you about you. I'm like, look, I'm telling you what I see. What do you see? What do you think about these things? And my hope is that the book is just as valuable for somebody who disagrees with things that I've said, because they're like, oh, no, totally not. You know what I think that I never thought of before? Great. Wonderful. That's all I wanted. You don't have to agree with me. I want you to understand yourself better. And if you understand yourself better because you hate my book, great.
It's done its job.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer it that you like it. But and that we have a love relationship around it. But I'm totally satisfied with someone saying, yeah, I totally disagree with something, and that gave me a lot of ideas. Wonderful. That's all it was supposed to do. And I've often thought there are dance pieces that I've seen in the past that I continue to hate. And then there are so many that I've forgotten. And I'm like, well, the person that made the piece that I hate probably did more work than the ones that I've forgotten. It just wasn't the work that spoke to me. But
Yeah.
I bet there was more in that piece because it has stuck with me for so long.
I came across something that you wrote that struck me. You said, I make art because I want to find out where I mesh with and where I challenge my community. I use the creative process to develop compassion for what is foreign to me. I want my work to trigger memory, emotion, and heightened awareness through electric, disarming, and provocative images. As a member of a sometimes oppressed gender, an oppressive race, and a country that has exhibited questionable human values, I am fascinated by issues of morality, compassion, greed, manipulation, victimhood, power, and absolution. Obviously, that's a very layered statement, so I won't go into the whole thing, but I wanted to ask you, what does it mean in your work or in your life even to challenge your community?
Well, I think the first thing it means is to challenge myself. I'm part of the community. I'm not separate. So the first thing I'm thinking of as I'm challenging a community is like, well, what are the systems that are including and excluding people, and how am I contributing to that? So for me, that also looks like what we were talking about at the beginning, anti-racism work, dissolving my attachment and belief in value in the patriarchy, in ableism, looking at the givens and really examining them. And in a community like a dance community, challenging the community for me means using some rigor to question what we're handing down to each other. So when I'm giving advice to younger teachers, I also want them to really do a lot of work unpacking how they were taught and what aligns with what you believe in and what doesn't. And what does that mean about the choices that you make? That might sound big and conceptual, but very simple example is many dance teachers walk into a room and there's one wall that has a mirror on it. And without any thinking or questioning or real choice making or sovereignty, that's the front of the room, and everyone will face it and use the mirror. And those are just invisible givens. But why? There's three other faces of the room, and you don't even have to face a flat wall. Now, I do because of my neurodiversity with a crazy facing a corner, but you could. And if you had a reason why that would be useful, you could face a corner too, or be off of a corner, right? There's no manual. I mean, your dance studio might have a manual, right? And a set of a handbook that you have to follow. And that's a whole different question or conversation about how you're dealing with structure and rules. But do you walk into a room and there's a front of the room? Do you show or do you talk or do you touch or like what, how were you taught things and what aspects of those, the way that you were taught are completely invisible to you and you're simply perpetuating them, which is how all these isms work and is how ableism works. And, you know, we expect people that don't fit the system to be the ones who mobilize. And as a teacher, I want students to be able to do less work adapting to my stable structures and more work figuring themselves out, which is a lot of work to do. So the more mobile and adaptable I make my structure and class and choices and communication, the less mobile they have to be and the more stability and grounding they can find in themselves to figure out who they are. And so for me, that also looks like I don't use counts for things. You do it on your timing. If you need to spend more time doing something, you do that. Now, I don't do that necessarily in like a piece of theater where there's a point about unison. And I'm not like, yeah, or don't, right? There's lots of rigor when there needs to be. But in class, when we're trying to get to know our bodies better, to me, saying, yeah, this weight shift happens on this count. Well, it's not a weight shift, then it's just a goal, right? If I'm actually committing to like, I want you to have a felt experience here, I can't tell you how long that takes, which means maybe you don't stay with me in the class. Maybe you stay on that moment and you skip part of what I built because you're in something and you're onto something. I would much rather have somebody do that. And I feel like when we're talking about dissolving some of these systems, including capitalism and our attachment to it, which is also productivity and expectation and responsibility towards and a sense of belonging and all those things that attach to capitalism, for a student in my class to be like, it feels really uncomfortable to just be repeating this thing that was happening in the head and not be going on and everybody else has gone on in the phrase and they can see that I haven't gone on because this thing was seated and they're all lying down now and I'm not doing what they're doing, you know, that kind of discomfort. And sitting in your body with that discomfort and tolerating it because something is happening that you're going to commit to and prioritize over what I said or what I wanted or what everybody else is doing, that is a way from an embodied place to start dismantling some of these systems inside of us. And if we want to find real embodied consent, sovereignty, non-attachment, it takes putting our bodies in some fairly uncomfortable positions.
Our conversation has really touched on how art questions systems, and certainly it's historically had that role within the limitations of who has the power to shape what gets seen and what we have access to in later generations. But do you think that art has and artists have a responsibility to engage with morality, or is that something that we've projected onto it?
Responsibility, I don't know. I do think it's an opportunity. I don't know that I'd want to say something that classifies it from an outside perspective, like, artists have a responsibility to do this or that. I think it is a saturated and condensed experience of being a human and being a human in conversation with other humans. And I would hope that in that context, everybody would be interested in morality. But I don't know that I would use the word responsibility. I think you have a great opportunity to do it. And I think it's a really worthwhile thing to do. And I hope that people do it.
After everything you've seen and experienced as a professional dancer, a director of a performance company, an educator, and now a writer, what do you think brings people back to themselves?
Time, like slowing down,
Yeah.
I think is the only thing that really works. It doesn't work unto itself. You need other things, but time, and of course time is a privilege too. And so you can't really separate healing from time, and you can't separate time from privilege, and a single working mother of 3 kids in an urban setting does not usually have the time to heal, right? That's survival mode. So having the time to heal is a privilege unto itself. And of course, as with all privileges, it's going to be offered to the few.
Ironically, the season is the Empress rising. And when I wrote to you to pitch for you coming on the show, I talked about how I felt like you embodied a lot of and the Empress came out.
Oh, love it.
That's the mother of the deck card. The best embodied feminine archetypal qualities, mother, nurturing, all the best things. Oh, okay. Got the 10 of Wands. Wands are action. The 10 of Wands is about carrying too much. He can't do this work by himself. He's going to have to either ask for help or let something go, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if in the context of the conversation, having that come out next to the Empress is a little bit of, we've talked about releasing some societal expectations. We've talked about shifting viewpoints. It could have some significance personally for you too. And the other card I pulled out was the Death card, which I know is always scary, but it's really about letting things end, having an ending to move on to whatever is new. In the context of our conversation, all of these make a lot of sense. I guess in the context of what you've shared about your journey too, right? You let go of the way you were doing work to find a way that was less mentally hard on you, shifting into something that felt good in you and then also still serves people, right? There's certainly a lot of that. And to me, you embody Empress energy. That's why I wrote to you, right? Do they have any meaning or insight for you with what you know about them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like my idea of Empress is also there's a like as above, so below feeling of like it's not just me pouring out to that, which feels maternal. I'm like seeding and planting and growing and nurturing kind of downward. But Empress feels like it's got equal amount of energy of receiving wisdom and power and connecting and hooking in, tapping into what is bigger and the divine. And for me, that feels like that flows into that second card, the 10 of Wands, in that sense of like, I if that gets off kilter, the receiving from, and I'm pulling it from above in this context, this kind of like axis context. So to me, that's not like a particular sense of God, but what is bigger and the divine and being nurtured.
Yep.
And I think as a person that grew up without enough nurturing from the outside, that is a weaker area in my life, which is asking for, but also taking the time to really receive and be nourished by. And I find that I'm trying to get better in my older age at taking the time to metabolize. I got a beautiful text from a student this morning, and I notice in my body a little habit or tendency to kind of, oh, that's nice, brush it away. And I think at some point, I developed a feeling that if like you were going to take in these things that feel positive, you had to equally believe like the negative reviews and whatever. And since I wanted to be able to reject those, I kind of had to reject everything that everybody said about me all the time. It was all blinders on and only my own point of view. But I think they're actually separate things, right? And yeah, the person who says something positive about me is also talking through a filter from a particular day and got struck at a particular moment in a particular way by me. It doesn't necessarily make it universally true about me. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone will feel that way, etc. There's something I can learn about the negative from taking in the what feels like positive. And I think there's a much more nuanced sense of nourishment that I could have in my life and learn to savor some of the nourishment that I get, whether that's taking a little bit more time in nature or sitting with an effect that I've had on somebody that's positive, gratitude, pride in that positive way. Like, I think I could take more time, and that would allow me to put down some of the pressure. That 10 of Wands to me was a very internal
Yeah.
card. I put that pressure. I carry too much. I hold too much. I do that to myself. Nobody's really asking me to do that. That's really me doing that. And I do so much of this maternal energy towards people, clients and students and audience and readers and my actual kids, and not enough soaking in and receiving. And I think that puts the Empress energy out of balance in that
Yeah.
I carry too much and I need to create some kind of end.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the death card would then signify, when you come to that spot, that there are good things beyond that, right? Are you ready for the last question? What becomes possible in our lives, in our work, and even in how we meet the world when we're actually in relationship with ourselves and expressing from that place instead of from disconnection?
So, if we think about physics and biomechanics, if you are standing and you can really feel your dynamic alignment, your base of support center of gravity, your equilibrium, interoception, proprioception, these are all senses just as strong as vision and taste and sound, etc. If you can be really self-aware in that moment, your body can do almost anything. I don't mean like we suddenly can be Simone Biles, but like your body can adapt to most things, which means that in relationship, we're the same. When we are feeling ourselves in the moment, I need more time. I don't want this. I do want that. This doesn't feel good. This would feel great, right? When we are really in tune with ourselves, we're truthful. If we're in tune and accepting ourselves, we're truthful and not so reactive. So then somebody can break up with us or write a bad review or say something mean or what, and we're like, oh, that's that feels like that was trying to hurt me. I wonder why. I wonder what that's about. One of my closest friends right after September 11th said, I feel like we should go over to Afghanistan and just be like, my God, we have hurt you so much. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about it. We clearly didn't realize how much damage we'd done, that you did this, and this was how you felt. So we obviously have a lot of learning to do. Of course, that's not what we did. We went and bombed the crap out of them. And that's what we do, right? Somebody hurts us and we want to hurt them back. But I think the answer for me to your question is, if we really were aware of ourselves, we would be so much more grounded in our mobility that we could have these much more empathetic and accepting relationships with people, where we did more listening and we had more curiosity and we gave more time, and we were not so judgmental and critical and value driven and protective. We would feel our mobility and our adaptability so much that we wouldn't feel like we had to protect ourselves so much and so quickly, right? And so we would be able to take a little bit more time and be like, oh wow, looks like you're wanting to hurt me. I wonder why. And what's your part in that? What's my part in that? And how does that feel to me? And what do I need to do for myself to continue to feel safe? Oh, nothing. Turns out I could see that you were trying to hurt me, but it didn't really hurt. So now it's just a real curiosity for me. I mean, that's quite an idyllic relationship, and I certainly am not in that most of the time, but that's my answer to what would happen.
I had a breakup that really impacted me last year, and it was interesting because it's probably the only breakup that has hit me that hard. But it wasn't from the ego-driven, what is this person saying about me? Why are they abandoning me? It was the loss of the relationship on a purely, I thought this person would be in my life forever level. And it made me reflect on how I've viewed rejection or criticism in the past. And I'm happy that I'm old enough now that I could give myself the props of, wow, I have done so much work, like having come from a traumatic childhood with a lot of dysfunction and carrying a lot of that my whole life. And, that comes out impacting you and your behavior in ways that you don't even realize until you get far enough into the work that you're like, oh, I'm just running on autopilot in these responses from these harms that I had while I was developing. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, and it's also isolating because that relationship is hard to describe to people. People cannot relate. They're very caught up in, well, this means that, and because he left abruptly and he has a lot of trauma. And I know him well enough, and I'm far enough out of the hurt now. I know, how overwhelming things were for him. I saw it in his body. He said, I love you. And I said, I love you back. And he had a trauma response. I thought that even if we weren't romantic, we would be in each other's lives. We said that, mm-hmm. So I know in my empathetic self, and I know it is something I had to work on, having better boundaries and not always assigning a why to people or needing to know the why. But I also know myself well enough at this point that I knew him well enough. That's why we connected in this way that I've never experienced before, probably won't again. Can't articulate in words, can't articulate a lot of experiences we had together. And it's isolating because not only do people not understand, because so many of us are stuck in this reactive, ego-driven space, but we want to simplify. They're easier to process if they're simple. It's harder to look at someone and be like, they're complicated and there's this and there's that and here's how that played out, and it's unfortunate, it's sad, I wish it could be different, than it is to be like, this person ghosted you, they're an asshole, why would they do that right to you?
And that's part of the protectiveness, where it's like, well, if I can assign what the story is, then I know how to see it and avoid it, and I can never get hurt like this again, and I can control my future, which is just, I wish, but no, babe, right? We can't. And so I do think a lot of that storytelling is a fallacy. around safety. If I tell this story, or if I just define who you are, oh, you're a player, you're a bro, you're a this, so I'm going to avoid you. And I'm not saying don't avoid red flags that have become you. Of course, like we should, and there's plenty of fodder in that. But on that more nuanced level around relationships, there is this sense of, especially in retrospect, I'm going to tell a story of what you were doing and who you were and why you did that. And I'm going to put the nail in that story. And then I'm going to be able to put that on the shelf. And then when I see something like that, I'm going to say, that's what that is. And I'm going to be able to avoid it and keep myself safe. And I also have no part to play in this, right? It's a fallacy. And I wish there was some way to keep ourselves safe like that. But that's just not the human experience.
If you want to learn more about Alexandra's book, The Anatomy of Art, Unlocking the Creative Process for Theater and Dance, visit www.anatomyofart.com. This was our last special guest episode of Season 1. For our final episode, I'll weave together all the threads we've followed over the course of the Empress Rising, before we pause for our seasonal break. If you want to keep in touch between seasons, purchasing a membership gets you more of us and supports the show. Visit www.bloodmoonradio.com to find membership options. And until next time, remember, the truth echoes louder after dark, whispered, unfiltered, waiting to be touched. See you soon.